Hello, Shrew-universe, and welcome back to the Shakespearean Shrew. I am your Shakespearean Shrew, Karen Feiner, professor from the University of Oklahoma and lover of all things Bard. This podcast is a decorum-be-damned entrance into understanding Shakespeare's stages, for there are many, and all the players on it. Today, we're excited to welcome back Tyler Woods, artistic and executive director at Oklahoma Shakespeare in the Park, who is directing our production of Hamlet. Welcome. So we're really happy again to talk to you. Now we've gone from Macbeth in the last show to Hamlet, so it's a very tragic fall. And so what are some of the things that you have been working with in terms of Hamlet as a production? Because it is one of the Bard's most beloved plays, but it's also one of the longest.
Right. So this is my fourth go round with Hamlet, and I really wanted to approach it as I always have wanted to approach Hamlet from a language-based standpoint, not just any Shakespeare really for that, but something about Hamlet in particular always draws you back to the language, and so I tend to get out of the way of Hamlet more than with any other play in terms of concept or layering anything on additionally that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So we've got 10 actors doing a script that I've done before, the cut that I like. I did this cut myself almost 20 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
And I like it a lot. So I keep coming back to it. I've done this cut with 7 actors before. So I kind of feel like we're being luxurious with 10, you know. But so it's very straightforward. The concept, such as it is it's a modern Scandinavian simplicity. It's modern Scandinavia. The costumes are what has been described to me, I think, is elegant, or I think it's casual elegance. There's a term in fashion, I forget what it is right now, but it's basically simplicity, simple, clean forms, white, off-white, neutral colors, tones, classic lines of cuts, and things like that. So the costumes are beautifully done by Anne Wanger, who did our Macbeth costumes, which were cowboys. She did our Midsummer costumes, which were 1960s inspired. And these costumes are, we laugh because we keep saying the word simple and elegant, but I presented her sort of a Pinterest board inspiration for me that was, it almost looks like Mediterranean chic, or so there's a lot of like long sleeves or flowing, costumes for people. So I think it's very elegant and very luxurious at the same time, very demure, sure. And so anyway, that's the concept, and it's also a nod to Scandinavian simplicity in terms of the warmth. I think there's a Scandinavian word, and I think it's pronounced hygge, maybe Hygge, I believe. But it's simplicity in all of its forms, it's comfort, it's warmth, it's like what you want. It's Ikea, basically. It's the Ikea Hamlet is what we're going for. So, but we're getting out of the way of the language by sort of surreptitious, and I want to say this too about costumes, it's a real talent. It's a talent to be able to disappear,
Yes.
your costumes. So it's a talent to be able to say, okay, we're featuring the actors who are speaking the language and everything, but the costumes are so beautifully done and so finely cut that they accentuate what's already going on stage, already coming out of the actors' mouths, and so on and so forth. So that was a really, I feel like in some ways I probably gave Anne the hardest job all season. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
I said, I want elegant costumes that almost disappear in their elegance, and she's delivered, so we're excited to showcase those.
Well, we talked to her in an earlier podcast, and so for those of you who haven't heard it yet, please go listen, because she talks about that very obstacle. She talks about the importance in costuming of adding to it, but not distracting from it.
Right.
And the balance that has to be struck there in terms of doing it the best.
Right.
And I think that they definitely do it the best. Adwen's costumes are always awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, if anybody's interested in costuming, please go listen to her podcast because it's a good one. Which brings me to what she said one of the hardest things was with costuming, which is not the director's vision, but dealing with a budget.
Yeah.
And so how's the budget, because I mean, that's kind of your...
Right. Well, yeah, it's the executive part of my job description. We don't have one, is the short answer? No. Our budget's very small. Being a nonprofit and being a nonprofit in Oklahoma coming out of COVID, you know, we've just had a lot of challenges in the last couple of years, and so we're trying to be very resourceful in terms of what we can do and stretch the dollar. And sometimes that ends up meaning that people wear several hats at once, and sometimes it means that people, you know, we can't do as much as we'd like, but we stretch the dollar as far as we can. You know, hopefully we're getting to the point where we're recovering from COVID and that we can find some more corporate sponsors and foundation support, individual donors. I mean, being a nonprofit, you know, I've heard it said that your ticket pays for Act 1, your donation pays for Act 2. And I think that's a really great way to put it, you know, because we can't exist. I mean, if we charged as much as, if I charged as much as I needed to charge to produce a show like this, the tickets would be $200 a piece. You know?
Right.
I mean, it'd be that's why Broadway is so expensive, because they're not a nonprofit and they charge you what they need to charge you to make the money that they make. So there's challenges to the budget, I guess, is the short answer.
And I mean, I think, again, we find ourselves in another balancing act because you want to make Shakespeare accessible. You want to make it where, you know, people from all over can come and have access and, you know, be part of this community. And so I think on one hand, that kind of puts a cap on where you can ask a certain amount for tickets because there's only so much certain people are able to pay.
Right. I mean, there's only so much someone's going to pay to come sit on the lawn.
Yeah.
And bring their own lawn chair, you know, at the end of the day. But I mean, you know, and you're doing a 400-year-old play, and there's a lot of obstacles, you know, emotionally or mentally to get through it. A lot of people are, I don't want to say afraid of Shakespeare, but like there is a certain, there can be a certain barrier to Shakespeare, to classical theater. It's not like, you know, a more pop-oriented show or musical or concert or something, which is probably more popularly accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that bit of a barrier. It's like the ballet or the philharmonic in that sense, probably. And so even with the ballet or the philharmonic, it's dance and it's music. And so when you're just doing spoken word and you're speaking words that, for the most part, you know, you and I have talked about this in other podcasts. The words are the same, not really changed from early modern English, which is what Shakespeare wrote in, to now. But the fact that he wrote in poetry, and the fact that he wrote in a certain syntax, and the fact that it was a more literate society in many ways, means that the language is not quite as accessible as, you know, as it might be accessible to go see a ballet, or just to simply hear a symphony. So there are challenges there, but I think that, you know, people in Oklahoma deserve classic theater. We're the only full-time, year-round classical theater company in Oklahoma.
Well, and I talked to Melissa Chalsma.
Of course I know.
She's
I don't know another one.
she's the founder of the Independent Shakespeare Company in LA. And so I was talking to her about creating an organization and all that entailed. And the similarities were there. But the perspective that was different that I thought was so interesting is she was like, well, for me, Shakespeare's kind of a big sell because everybody knows his name. And so if it's another play, like if we did, you know, Marlowe or Johnson or some of the less known, that's always more of a challenge in terms of getting people to come because they don't know who it is, they're not familiar. But Shakespeare, everybody's familiar. Sometimes they're a little scared, but they know the name and they are intrigued by the experience. And so that was interesting to me because, again, I'd always been thinking about him as, you know, an obstacle. And so to kind of switch the script and think of him instead as somebody that's almost comforting in a way, somebody that has, that brings out that sense of community. So I just thought that different perspective, the idea of looking at Shakespeare as somebody who is a touchstone for a lot of people in their education. They've all been forced to read Shakespeare at some point. And again, I've talked to so many actors who have been like, yeah, that was terrible. And it's, I think it's interesting because it does tell us, teachers, that teaching Shakespeare by reading Shakespeare is not the way to go. But as we're coming into this, is there a draw? Is just the lure of Shakespeare something that, brings people to OSP?
The lure of Shakespeare. I think there's several lures that bring people to us. I think that there's outdoor theater under the stars that brings people to us. The fact that you can bring a picnic blanket, the fact that we have a full bar that offers bottles of wines to cocktails and sodas and beverages. I think there's that. So there's the romance of coming and cracking up a bottle of wine and watching Shakespeare, watching Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet or Midsummer Night's Dream. So there's that. It's a beautiful setting we've created here. It's a little miniature park in the little oasis in the middle of the city. I think that there is the lure, there is almost this expectation with Shakespeare, probably like there is with the ballet, capital P, or the Philharmonic, capital P. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I better go because it's cultural, I'm going to get, I've literally had parents say to me, pardon me, I've had parents say to me, I'm bringing my kids because we're going to get a little culture. I've had parents say that, we're bringing my kids. Because kids 12 and under are free outside, 12 and under are free. So, and I would like to someday, gosh, it would be great to offer this for free. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be a really great thing, if any corporate sponsors out there are listening. But anyway, it's one of those things where the lure of Shakespeare, I think, is manyfold. I do think that there is a lure to certain titles, like Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet or Much Ado About Nothing. And it's dependent upon who you are as a person, what your experience may have been as a everyone has a relationship with Shakespeare, whether they realize it or not,
Yes.
or whether they know it or not, or whatever it may be that you had a terrible experience in high school, being forced to read out Romeo and Juliet in rounds, like row, row, row your boat, like you're next, you do that, and that kind of stuff can tend to really damage someone's opinion of Shakespeare, but there's also ways that people are exposed to Shakespeare we don't realize. My mother used to quote Polonius to me, and I didn't even know it, until I know myself to be true, and neither a borrower nor a lender be, right?
So I love this because Polonius has some of the most quotable lines, and they sound so smart.
Yeah.
He's got those lines where he just sounds like he's a font of wisdom. And yet, for me, Polonius is kind of a jackass character.
Well, he's certainly what you might call a busybody or a know-it-all. He certainly he literally inserts himself where he shouldn't be, and that ends poorly for him.
Yes.
But Polonius is. It's funny. This is a play full of advice. It's full of fathers, and it's full of words. The advice given in this play is some of the best advice you'll find in literature. Polonius' speech to his son, again, neither a borrower nor a lender be, to thine own self be true. It's just chock full. And then the advice to the players that Hamlet gives. It's like, you can go to a 4-year acting school program, or you can read that speech at your bride. I'm joking, of course, but seriously, it's a very good speech to the players. And just do that, and you'll probably be okay as an actor. So there's just a lot of great advice in this play. It's a play about fathers. There's Polonius. There's Hamlet Sr., the ghost. There's Claudius. There's Fortinbras and his father and that whole relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There's the surrogate fathers of Yorick.
Yes.
Yorick. And sort of the gravedigger-ish is a fatherly figure-ish too. So, I mean, there's just, it's like full of fathers and sons. Not a lot of women in the play,
No.
too. So we've got Ophelia, we've got Gertrude, we've got Sarah, Violet playing Ophelia, and Albert playing Gertrude. And it's been really fun and interesting and fascinating to develop that relationship between the two of them and what they represent to each other within this world. So male, you know what I mean? So, and yet at the same time, this world, at least in the text, as well as the world that we created in our productions, has a softer side. I think that we've tapped into more of I guess there's a feminine energy, maybe. Not that necessarily softer equals feminine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean that. I just mean that, with Macbeth, it was cowboys
Yes.
and guns and spurs and kicking in the door and swinging the saloon doors and
Yeah.
murder. And with this one, we've got a lot of, the costumes are light and airy and clean and elegant, and there's fabric on the stage, and there's not a lot of murder until right at the very end when the proverbial hits the fan, right?
Right.
So, I don't really know how to categorize that, and I don't want to be very, I want to be nuanced about how I categorize it, but I do think that there is a softer side, and I think that's in the script. Hamlet is an intellectual. Hamlet is a thoughtful
Right.
person, whereas, Macbeth, if you're a hammer, the world is full of nails. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of characters like that in Shakespeare. Coriolanus is like that. In many ways, in many ways, you could argue that Romeo is a bit like that. I mean, he falls in love with this person. He falls in love with this person. He goes here. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, Iago just creates mischief everywhere you go. I mean, there's on and on and on. But with Hamlet, you have 2.5 hours of thoughtfulness to the point of inaction.
Yes.
Until it's forced upon him. And so there's a almost tortured, well, not almost tortured, I think usually tortured aspect to Hamlet that is an overthinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that's soft or hard or whether you can even categorize that in terms of durability or whatever. But I think that there is meaning in that. There is meaning in the idea that he is burdened with the weight of introspection to a point of inaction until it becomes inevitable to act.
Yes. I think it's also interesting because as we look at our poor Yorick, his jaw detaches. But as we look at Yorick and we think about this fool, I always found this scene one of my favorites. One, because I love fools, but two, because it showcases that the relationships between father and son are not necessarily good ones, because this one is one of Hamlet's best, right? This relationship that he has with this skull that once was Yorick, his father's fool, is the guy who kind of raised him, right? And he talks about in that scene the fact that he would give him piggyback rides, and like you said, he is one of those father figures. We don't really get that with his actual father. And we certainly don't get that with Claudius. So it seems like the relationship between Gertrude and whichever husband she has at the time seemed to override her relationship with her son. And then, like I said, Polonius, and as you said, he inserts himself everywhere, all the time. And while he gives great advice, he, as in his own relationships, doesn't recognize what he's asking of his own daughter in using her as a tool.
Yeah.
And so I think it is absolutely a play about relationships, but where in Macbeth we see an amazing relationship go bad. I feel like in this one we see an abundance of bad relationships and then kind of one good one, which I would say for me personally is Horatio and Hamlet, where you have two people being honest to each other. But yeah, I always find that to be interesting because we just did this juxtaposition between Macbeth and Hamlet, and there are so many things to look at, like the relationship between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, which again, as we've talked about in many episodes, is an amazing thing to behold. And then the relationship between Ophelia and Hamlet, which is an amazing contrast because it is a disaster.
Yeah, you know, I think that the luxury of having tackled this so many times in my career has led me to the desire to keep. I mean, you know, I heard someone once say Shakespeare is unplumbable.
Yes.
Mark Lamos said that. I still remember that as a director, Mark Lamos, and I thought, wow, that's accurate. But you can't ever, get to the bottom of it. And a couple of things that have, hit me in working with this play this time around have been the relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia and Polonius and Ophelia. So Ophelia looms large for me in this particular production, possibly because I'm a dad now of a daughter, of a little girl. And, I just keep thinking about that relationship with Polonius. There is no Mrs. Polonius in the play.
Right.
And there's no mention of Mrs. Polonius. I mean, something happened to her, at some point along the way. And we've kind of discussed that, the actors and I. And I think we sort of loosely decided that in some ways she may have gone mad, because that's, mad is the olden time
Right.
term for it, right? That's what we say happens to Ophelia, she goes mad, right? But that's the dramatic term for it. But that she would have withered away sort of mentally, unfortunately, and then probably passed away somehow, who knows? And what you're left with then is Polonius trying to be both father and mother to his two children. And the chancellor to the throne of Denmark. So he's not only father and mother to his children, but he's in some ways father and mother to his country. Especially with a king like Claudius, you've got to be more hands-on. And you get the impression that with a king like Hamlet Sr., there was a lot of diplomacy that probably was left to Polonius, and not necessarily to Hamlet Sr. Hamlet Sr. was a warrior. I mean, that's made pretty clear. He was armed at point exactly cap a pay, as was in his life. I mean, he wore armor. He was a warrior king. So I think Polonius, as the court counselor, is in charge of a lot of people and a lot of balancing acts. And I think that with his children, with his daughter, he does. I think maybe in this go-round, I've been a little bit more kind to Polonius than I have let myself be previously. Because I've thought about it a lot. I've thought, well, he's got a lot on his shoulders, and he keeps coming back to, I think it's my daughter. I think Hamlet's mad at losing his wits or whatever. He's acting this way because of my daughter. It's my daughter. I love it. And then when he forbids her from seeing him, Hamlet goes completely off the rails, and Polonius sort of beats himself up and says, "Beshrew my jealousy. This is the lost love." So he keeps coming back to that, and I think that even though he puts her out there as this tool to use her to try and get to him in some ways, after the nunnery scene, as it's called, the to be or not to be, get thee to a nunnery scene, there is this element where he kind of in our production, he goes to try and comfort his daughter, and can't, and doesn't know how to. He's not mom.
Yeah.
You know, he's not able to identify that. But what he is able to do is just offer this sort of clumsy, you know. And we talk about, he has this line where he says, "You need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said. We heard all." And I said, "Boy, that is the wrong thing to say at the wrong time." It's like, don't worry about it, Ophelia. We read your diary. We know everything. That's like the last thing you want to say to, you know,
Right.
your daughter. Don't worry about it. Read your diary. We're good. But he doesn't know that. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? That's trying to comfort her.
Right.
He's just so clumsy at it. And that's what ultimately gets him killed. You know, no wretched, rash, intruding fool. As Hamlet says about him, he's trying to resolve things. He's trying to fix everything. He's trying to be everywhere and all things to all people at all times. And give this sage advice that covers everything. He's trying to cover life for Laertes. You know, he gives them this advice that, frankly, like I said, I think I said earlier, my mom used to quote Polonius to me. It's, you know, it's this: here's your advice for life. If you followed that advice in life to the T, you'd probably have a really great life.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you follow that advice, and then you took Hamlet's advice as a player, you took that to heart, you'd have a really great life as an actor, and you'd probably be really successful. Do you know what I mean? Like those two things, right? But human nature is such that we don't sometimes listen to advice and so on and so forth. But I think, so that relationship to me is very fascinating. Now, Gertrude is interesting to me because you're right. I think she's also a person who's been she's sort of been put in a no-win situation. And whether it's, you know, whether it's the 11th or the 9th century, I guess, Hamlet, you know, or whether it's the 16th century, you know, revenge tragedy, Hamlet, or whether it's the 17th century, early 17th century second quarter of Hamlet. Wherever you look at this story, or whether it's set in 21st century Denmark as we're doing it, you have a woman whose husband, the king, is murdered. She's not in line for the throne, in much the same way that Prince Philip was never in line for the English throne, you know. So she's not in line. Her son Hamlet is, but somehow Claudius steps in between the election and my hopes, as Hamlet says, and that's a whole other ball of wax between Hamlet and Claudius. But she's sort of in a place where what else is she going to do but let herself kind of be married to this person who claims the throne, claims the legitimacy, and claims that he can take care of her and Denmark and everything else. And in the heyday and the blood is tame, it's humble. She's past her prime, as they say in the play, right? So she's got this person who wants to come along and take care of everything, and it's like, I think she's put in a terrible position.
Yes.
And I think she's put in a position where she feels like her agency is very limited, and her voice is very limited. Gertrude doesn't say a lot in the first half of the play. I mean, she doesn't really say a lot until the closet scene, in which she's pretty beat up upon, frankly. So that's a lot of really response more than anything else. We've tried to find ways for Gertrude to have some agency later in the play. We found some pretty amazing choices for her and for Horatio, which I think that will be really cool for the audience to see the choices being made. They're subtle, but they're big too. They're subtle choices, but they mean big things. But I think, you know, finding her relationship with Ophelia and how she identifies with the only other woman in the court, the young woman in the court, who also has her agency taken away from her, and who is also told what to do, where to go, who to love, you know. And for us, we've kind of explored that Hamlet and Ophelia seem to love one another. You know, really, truly love. I mean, I did love you once. You made me believe so. I have many remembrances of yours that you did. I mean, all the signs are there that they love one another. You know, but something has come between them to say no, and that's something that comes between them is the theory that they can't love each other, the social propriety of it, Laertes warning his sister, you can't, he's not going to love you, not for real. Polonius, he's messing with you. You know, all of these things that they don't believe Hamlet is true. Well, Hamlet is beyond. Harold Bloom says Hamlet is post-Shakespearean, the character of Hamlet, and you know, I think it's true. He's not only post-Shakespearean, he's post-us now. think Hamlet has evolved in such a way that Hamlet is beyond traditional bounds of mores and expectations and
I just think it's interesting because you mentioned him being beyond, and in the play, we have like almost a time warp where we go from young Hamlet, the student, to very mature Hamlet.
Follow the Sparrow Hamlet,
Yes, and the timeline even doesn't match up in terms of his age, and we're like, what just happened?
How long was he in England?
Yes.
10 years? It seems like it. He was in England for 10 years, is what it seems like. Do you know what I mean? Which doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense in the timeline of the play, but at the same time, it's such an interesting...
Yeah. That's why Hamlet gets played by 24-year-old actors and 37-year-old actors and, sometimes 50-year-old actors to legitimately.
Yes.
Sure. Why not? Have a 50-year-old Hamlet, have a 24-year-old Hamlet. It all works because it's beyond age, it's beyond conception of, it's non-linear time.
Right.
Which is post-Shakespearean, which is post-human, which is post what we conceive of as time. It's very, what he learns and what he's able to share with Horatio in Act 5, and his thoughts on the readiness is all, to follow the sparrow, which is one of my favorite speeches in all of Shakespeare, but it's, I don't think he's bound by the typical mores and structures and strictures that the rest of the court is bound by.
Yeah.
And so when he's talking to when the ghost father is telling him these things, I think there's an impact there because this is a father who is, for Hamlet in many ways, for Hamlet, the young Hamlet in many ways, unattainable. Imitatable, but unattainable. I don't think he is that guy. He's a student at Wittenberg. His father puts on armor and fights the Norwegians, that's not Hamlet.
Right.
That's not what he does. And yet Hamlet proves to be more of a swordsman, a statesman, a better son, in many ways a better, I don't know what to say, I guess, betrothed, lover, something to Ophelia than anybody else. In ways he comes in, the grave scene is so fascinating to me. It's so much about, Laertes' sorrow for his sister's loss, and he wants to be buried with her, and it's this idea that I can't live without her, and this sorrow for her. And there's a connection and a protection of her in Act 1, or I guess it's Act 2, with his advice to her and how he's warning her. But when it comes down to it, when they say funerals are not for the dead, they're for the living. Right? Mm-hmm. And so this funeral ends up, in many ways, disrespecting the corpse of Ophelia. They both jump in the grave with her and rattle her around a bit, and all this stuff. But Hamlet says, "Oh my God, I loved her. 40,000 brothers could not love her," And then he beats himself up for losing his cool with Laertes. Mm-hmm. There's something that in it that is deceivable. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something in it with Hamlet, and I'm not sure I don't know. I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't say, solved it, we answered it. But I feel like this go-around, my fourth go-around of this play, I certainly feel like I've delved deeper than I ever have before with these actors, and we've all gone on a journey of discovery in interpersonal relationships amongst the characters that I've heretofore not perhaps been able to tap into quite as deeply as this.
Nice. You said the thing about answering questions, and I think that's so interesting because the play starts with a question, right? Who's there?
Not John.
And so I think that question and the questions that follow, I feel like questions drive the entirety of this play.
Yeah.
We're constantly questioning. We're questioning if Hamlet is actually mad. We're questioning if he loves Ophelia or not. We're questioning if Claudius did in fact kill the king, or if, Shakespeare, if Hamlet just, wants to think he does, and so reads his response to the rat trap or the mouse trap in a particular way. Right? So I feel like this entire play is questions that don't necessarily have answers to them. We just, at the end, have a story.
Right. So David, who's playing Claudius, he and I have talked a bit about the fact that the actions he takes to send Hamlet to England and some of the stuff that he does later in the play it's not great. It's underhanded. It's poisoning. All of these things. He's using Laertes to get what he wants. But none of that is an admission that he did it. However, there is a private moment where he tries to pray and he does admit it. So we know that he's guilty of the murder, right? So that particular question gets answered out of the horse's mouth. But nobody else is privy to that. Not even Hamlet.
Right.
Hamlet comes into that prayer after. And so we get to know, I guess we get the vindication of knowing, yeah, Claudius is guilty, he did this thing. But nobody else in the world knows it, and when you have someone that murders the Chancellor of Denmark, essentially, the only reason his head isn't on a pike is because he's the prince. Anybody else, Horatio or otherwise, would have been killed for killing Polonius. But he's shipped to England with the expectation, of course, then in secret, that England will kill him.
Right.
But it's this idea, I guess what I'm getting at is that Claudius, he even presents it to Gertrude of, oh, you're Hamlet, we're going to have to ship him away. I mean, it's terrible. And he even tells Hamlet, the bark, your safety, we're sending you to England. So that, like he's able to present himself. That's what's so great about Claudius to me, is that he's able to both be a villain but present himself as, I'm doing the thing that the state expects me to do.
Right.
And even in the murder, Laertes comes back wanting to kill everybody. I mean, he's, swoop-staked by revenge. And he's ready to just kill everybody. And he tries to kill Hamlet over the body of his dead sister. He's ready to he's a loaded gun at this point. Well, Claudius uses that gun. He uses the weapon, but that's not to say that Laertes, without Claudius's direction, wouldn't have gone off and hunted Hamlet down and caused mayhem anyway. So I guess I'm sort of being roundabout, and I'm not sure I'm making my point. My point is that Claudius, you have to find when there's an evil character or a villain, you have to, with that actor or as the actor, you have to find reasoning and justification for what they're doing. And I think David and I have been trying to work on ways of letting him have a way into Claudius's reasoning of, look, and we've even talked about, like, hey, how was this relationship between Claudius and older brother Hamlet? Did he bully him all the time? Was he hateful to him all the time? What happened there? What was that like? I don't know. Not that that's justification for murder, but I'm just saying, like, what are the bullet points here? What is the Richard IIIness of it all? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is it that makes this happen? What is the Macbethian nature of it all?
What's the impetus?
Right? What's the impetus, and how do you latch into that? So that's been a fun, I guess, exercise of exploration with David.
Nice. So as we head into the production of Hamlet, which starts September 12th and goes to September 29th, we have a couple of fun activities on the agenda. So the first one is on the 14th, and that is going to be, we'll call it the education night. So I'll be talking Hamlet before the production, and then we'll have a Q&A with the cast and crew afterwards. So for all of those in attendance, please come asking questions in the beginning, at the end. Love questions. We'll do my best to answer any and all, and then the cast and crew will take it away at the end of the show. And then we have another fun night planned. So September 21st, I'll let you talk about.
Yeah, so we're doing Shakespearefest. So it's the first night of Oktoberfest, officially, for 2024. And we've partnered with 405 Brewing, who does our Shakespeare. Which probably, I don't know if it's in the picture, but
See the
this
back.
beer right here, that they brew our own beer, and it's delicious. And 405 Brewing out of Norman, Oklahoma makes it for us. And we're also partnering with Paseo Grill, who is a new restaurant called Henrik's, but they're providing sausages, pretzels, and German-based sort of food.
Because you can't have Shakespearfest without that.
German food. Yeah, exactly. And we feel like it's kind of Danish. I mean, it's in the same realm of, Europe, Scandinavia.
over there.
It's over there, right? Anyway, it goes hand in hand. And so on the 21st, from 6 o'clock to 7:30, we're calling it a Hamlet pre-show event. $25 gets you a wristband that lets you have tastings of the beer and food, and also you can participate in a stage combat demo experience led by our combat choreographer for the show and artistic associate of Oklahoma Shakespeare, Chris Cuss, who is also a professor at Oklahoma City University. He's a professor of movement and stage combat over there. And he's going to basically just lead our audience member in some light demonstration, and then we're going to incorporate our fight call as sort of a capstone to his presentation as well. So you get to see the actors do a fight call. So you kind of get to see how the sausage is made, and you also get to eat sausage. So really, I don't know.
What
and
better
drink
event
beer.
could you do?
It's a night of beers and sausages. But and then you get to see Hamlet as part of it. So what could be better? And so yeah, that's it. I should also mention that on the 27th, this is we're doing a day with Shakespeare, which is a student matinee series. It's a 10 a.m. performance at Oklahoma City Community College Visual and Performing Arts Center. 10 a.m. performance for kids. So if any students are listening, if any teachers are listening, schools, we have that every year. We haven't had it since 2019 because of the pandemic, but it's finally back, and it's, like I said, it's an OCCC. The tickets are $10, and we just tour. We tour ourselves out there for a 10 a.m. show and do that. And it's a 1,000-seat auditorium. There's still a few seats left. I think we've got over 600 kids signed up so far, but yeah. So we're going to be doing that. So that's it seems like every weekend with Hamlet we've got some sort of big deal going on. But yeah, I think the scholarship night with your lecture or presentation and the Q&A after will be really a lot of fun. And I'm encouraged that we're going to be able to do that again. So thank you for doing that and being part of that.
It's my pleasure. Talking Hamlet is so much fun.
Talking Hamlet.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming to chat with us. And thank you all for listening. We are going to be giving away 2 tickets to Hamlet. So please check out, after you listen to this amazing podcast, please check out our Instagram. All the rules will be posted there. You can get yourself situated, and we'll be announcing our winner on the 18th of September. So please make sure you play to get some amazing tickets to an amazing show. So again, I would love your feedback. As always, what did you like? What would you like to hear about next? Please let me know. Please subscribe and put your email on our website. And just remember, all the world's a stage, and you too can be a shrew.